Okay. Yeah. So, one second. Yeah. So, hopefully all of you can see the poem, and some of you may already have your textbooks, American and Postcolonial Literature textbooks. You can look at the poem in the textbook as well. This is a poem titled Africa by the Senegalese poet David Diop. So you have some information about the poet in your textbook, and I had also shared a link in the Google Classroom. Hopefully you have gone through that. But to put it very briefly, David Diop was a Senegalese writer. Senegal was a West African country which was under French colonialism until 1960. So he was from Senegal, but he grew up, most of his life was spent in France, and he wrote in French. So in some sites, you might see that he is shown as a French writer. That is because he wrote in French and he lived most of his life in France. But he was actually from this West African country called Senegal. And what we can see most clearly in his poetry is a very sharp criticism of European imperialism and colonialism and racism, especially from France, because France was the country that was colonizing his country at that time. And despite the fact that he actually did not spend much time in Africa, he grew up and spent most of his life in France, still he has a very deep relation to Africa. So this poem, Africa, that we are about to study, that we are about to discuss now, shows us the relation that he has to this Africa, which is a concept in his mind, which is less of an experience and more of an imagined concept in his mind. And his poems are full of anger and criticism against imperialism, as I've already said. And he is considered to be part of this movement called negritude, 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 which was a kind of Black Pride movement. It was a literary movement by writers from African and Caribbean countries who were colonized by France. So many of them were actually African writers or Caribbean writers living in France, but who were reacting against colonialism and who were trying to talk about their pride in their African heritage. So that was the kind of writing that Diop did. And this poem, Africa, is a very good example of that. It's a very short and very simple poem. So we will just very quickly look through that, go through the poem. Africa. Africa, my Africa. Africa of proud warriors in ancestral savannas. Africa of whom my mother sings on the banks of the distant river. I have never known you, but your blood flows in my veins, your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields. The blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery. Africa, tell me, Africa, is this your back that is unbent? This back that never breaks under the weight of humiliation, this back trembling with red scars and saying no to the whip under the midday sun. But a grave voice answers me, impetuous child, that tree, young and strong, that tree over there, splendidly alone amidst white and faded flowers, that is your Africa springing up anew, springing up patiently, obstinately, whose fruit bit by bit acquires the bitter taste of liberty. So as I mentioned, it is a very short and simple poem, and you can very clearly see the pride in Africa as well as the anger and pain in the heritage of slavery that Africa was forced to shoulder. So the first few lines of the poem talk about the poet's relation to Africa. Africa, my Africa. He's addressing Africa. He's calling out to Africa and saying, Africa, my Africa. Even though I have never actually lived in Africa, even though I spend most of my life in Africa, I still consider Africa to be my Africa. So Africa, my Africa, Africa of proud warriors in ancestral savannas. So rather than thinking of Africans as, colonized or slaves or something, this is how I prefer to remember Africa, as a nation of proud warriors in ancestral savannas. Savanna refers to a certain kind of grassland that is very ubiquitous in African countries. So in ancestral savannas, in olden days, my ancestors were proud warriors in the savannas of Africa, in the grasslands and woodlands of Africa. So that is what I want to remember. My blood comes from the blood of proud warriors in ancestral savannas. And you can also see that the adjective ancestral is actually referring to the proud warriors rather than the savannas. So it's some kind of a transferred epithet as well. So Africa of proud warriors in ancestral savannas, Africa of whom my grandmother sings on the banks of the distant river. So this is how I know about Africa. My grandmother, who lives by a distant river, probably in Africa, probably in Senegal. So she sings about Africa while sitting on the banks of the distant river. And it is from her songs that I know about Africa. Africa of proud warriors in ancestral savannas. This is probably the content of the song. This is how he imagines Africa. And how does he get this image of Africa? From the song sung by his grandmother sitting on the banks of a river. I have never known you, but your blood flows in my veins. So I have never known you. I have never actually lived much in Africa. I have never experienced Africa. So I have never known you, but I know you. I know you through the songs that my grandmother sings. And also I know you at a much more visceral level because your blood flows in my veins. The blood that flows in my veins is African blood. So there is a part of my identity that is inalienable. Nobody can take that away from me. Nobody can alienate that from me. And that part of my identity is Africa. So Africa is so much a part of me that your blood, the blood of Africa, flows in my veins, even though I have never known you. So by this statement, what he's talking about, literally, yes, he's talking about how he belongs to this African race. And that is a biological fact that nobody can deny and nobody can take away from him. And he sees it as a matter of pride. That is the literal meaning. But at a deeper level, he's trying to say that Africa, the entire land, its culture, everything, even though he has never experienced those things, even though he has no first-hand knowledge of those things, they are still very much a part of his identity. So Africa, my Africa, Africa of proud warriors in ancestral savannas, Africa of whom my grandmother sings on the banks of the distant river, I have never known you, but your blood flows in my veins. And then he goes on to talk about that blood. He is going to now describe what it means to say that your blood flows in my veins. What does it mean to say that African blood flows in my veins? What does it mean to assert his African identity? Your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields, the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery. Your beautiful black blood. First of all, pay attention to the alliteration here. Beautiful black blood, right? B, b, b. That the sound b gets repeated in these three consecutive words. Your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields. What kind of blood is it? To say that Africa's blood flows in my veins, this is not just some simple blood. It is not just a simple thing to say that I am an African. but there is an entire history to the blood that flows in my veins, your beautiful black blood. Again, blood cannot actually be black, right? Blood is red, no matter whatever your skin color, the blood is actually red, but he is calling it black blood because it is the blood of Africans. So again, there is a way in which he plays with adjectives. Black, the adjective stands for the blood, but actually not literally black blood, but it is the blood of black people. And because it is the blood of black people, it is a beautiful black blood. Your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields. So think about how during the time of colonialism, the Africans were taken as slaves to all these colonial countries, colonial European, to all these colonizing countries, to all these European countries, including France, where they were made to work in the fields. So while they were working in the fields, they had to irrigate the fields. Irrigate means they have to pour water on the crops and all that. But here it is not water that irrigates the fields, but the beautiful black blood of Africa, which means that the people, the Africans who were taken as slaves to work in these fields, they actually watered the fields with their blood, which means they were whipped and they were maybe killed, they were hurt so much that it is almost as if their blood flowed into the earth and irrigated the fields. And then he goes on to elaborate that your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields, the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery. So this black blood need not refer to literal blood. It can refer to literal blood that was spilled in the fields as well. But here he says the blood of your sweat. As slaves, you were made to sweat in those fields. And this is also a very visual image. You think about a very beautifully black body on which sweat is coming, and then that sweat itself will look black. So the blood of your sweat, so the black blood could actually be the sweat of the African who is toiling in the fields. The blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work. Why are you sweating? You sweat when you work hard, right? So the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work. But why are you working? Not for yourself. You are not making crops for yourself. You are not working to just feed your family. Rather, you are being forced to work as a slave. So what kind of work is it? The work of your slavery. So in those few lines, the entire history of African slavery is just mentioned. There are very small strokes using which the poet makes the history of slavery in Africa, history of African slavery clear. Your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields, the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery. So much is the invocation. In the beginning, he's talking to Africa, he is addressing Africa, and he's saying, these are the things that I know about Africa. This was once a land in ancestral times, in ancient times. This was a land where my ancestors lived and they were proud warriors in the savannas. I have never known you, but I know about you in two different ways. One, through the songs of my grandmother, and another because your blood flows in my veins. It is something that will always be part of my identity. And then he describes the blood. What kind of blood is it? The beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields, the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery. Now, in the next few lines, again, he is addressing Africa and he is presenting an image of Africa. And later we will see that there is a conflicting image of Africa. So this entire poem is about different images of Africa. So we started out by Africa representing the proud warriors in ancestral savannas, but that is the past. And then we came to a slightly more recent past, which is the past of colonialism, which is the past of slavery, when African slaves were made to sweat and work and sweat blood in the fields. So now he comes up with another image and he says, Africa, tell me, Africa, is this your back that is unbent? This back that never breaks under the weight of humiliation, this back trembling with red scars and saying no to the whip under the midday sun. So this is another visual image that he is presenting us with. Again, addressing Africa, he's saying, tell me something, Africa. This is an image that I have about you. Tell me whether this is true. Tell me whether this image of you is correct. Africa, tell me, Africa, is this your back? So the image we have is of the back of a man, probably a bare back. And you would have seen a lot of films. For example, if you watch this film called Django Unchained by Quentin Tarantino, you will see a lot of images of slavery. There are many other, of course, there are a lot of films, very interesting films about slavery, but this is a very visual image. The black back of a black man, of an African man, which is unbent. It refuses to bend, which is not very literal, but to say that no matter what happens, this person will not give up his dignity. So is this your back that is unbent? So when I think about Africa, this is the image that comes into my mind. The back of a person, an African, that is unbent. And is it your back? I think it is your back. So tell me, Africa, is this your back that is unbent? This back that never breaks under the weight of humiliation. This person has been humiliated. But even under the weight of humiliation, this person's back never breaks. So there is physical humiliation, that is beating and whipping and all those things, which leave a lot of scars. The next line talks about scars. But even then, this African never loses his spirit. So this is the image I have in my mind of Africa. This back that never breaks under the weight of humiliation. This back trembling with red scars and saying no to the whip under the midday sun. This back trembling with red scars. There are so many scars from whips for disobedience or for not doing the work as fast as the masters are telling them to do. So in the days of slavery, the slaves would be whipped for any small thing, even any kind of imaginary fault. They would still be whipped. So this person's back is covered with red scars, whip marks, in such a way that it looks as if the back is trembling. Because there are so many scars, it looks as if the back is actually trembling with scars. But actually, this back never trembles, this back never breaks, this back never bends. Literally, they may actually be forced to bend, the skin may break because of the whip marks, but the spirit of this person will never bow down. So this back trembling with red scars and saying no to the whip under the midday sun. So under the harsh sunlight of the midday sun, these slaves are being forced to work in the fields. And for any small thing, they will be beaten with the whip. They will be whipped hard. And even though this person has already borne so many red scars of whip marks, even so, this person is still able to say no to the whip. To the whip means to the person holding the whip, to the master or the foreman who is holding the whip. So this is an image of Africa that I have. I am thinking about a slave who is working in the plantation, who is working in the fields, who is being whipped under the midday sun and forced to work in a way that is intended to humiliate him, to hurt him, to break him, to bow him down. But still he refuses to bow down. Still he refuses to break, and Even with so many whip marks, he is still able to turn around and say no to the person holding the whip. It is as if the person holding the whip has all the power. So you would not expect the other person to say no, because the moment you say no, you will get whipped, right? But this person is still unafraid and he says no to the whip under the midday sun. This is the image that the poet says that he has of Africa, and he is now asking Africa, tell me, is this your back? So he acknowledges in the beginning that he has never known Africa except for the fact that African blood flows in his veins, and he has heard so many songs of Africa's glorious past from his grandmother. But now he says, I have an image in my mind, and this is the image of a proud, unafraid, unbowed back. That is, there is a lot of, when you think about the trembling with red scars and all that, you can think not just about the pain, but also about anger. The word, the color red is connected to anger and rage. So there is so much pain and humiliation that is being visited upon these slaves, and this looks like the back of a man who refuses to break under all those humiliations, and who is instead trembling with anger and saying no, standing tall and saying no to the master. This is the image I have, and tell me, Africa, is this image correct? But now pay attention here, because the last few lines beginning with but, there is a different image of Africa. It is as if somebody else is now going to answer the question. And the very word but actually, it is a, we have already studied that it is a conjunction, and it shows that whatever comes after but will be in contradiction to whatever was said before the word but. So all this while he has given a certain impression of Africa, about the pride of Africans, about the strength of Africans, about the glory of Africans, even in the middle of slavery. And the image we get of Africa is full of rage and anger and pain and humiliation. But now we are going to get a different, slightly different image. So he has asked Africa, tell me, Africa, whether my image of you is correct. But a grave voice answers me, impetuous child, that tree, young and strong, that tree over there, splendidly alone amidst white and faded flowers, that is your Africa springing up anew, springing up patiently, obstinately, whose fruit bit by bit acquires the bitter taste of liberty. But the answer I got was not what I expected. I asked Africa whether my image of her was correct, but a grave voice answers me, a grave voice, a serious voice answers me. And the next few lines are the answer given by that grave voice. And who is that grave voice? It is probably the voice of Africa. So he was asking a question to Africa. Now Africa is responding, answering. And this is the answer. Impetuous child. Impetuous means wild and, spirited child. So Africa is such an old country that you get this idea of an old person responding. And the author, the poet, is very angry. He is full of rage at the history of slavery that is his heritage. But Africa tells him that actually Africa is so much more older than all that. And Africa says, see, you are a child. You are a wild, impetuous child. You are a very spirited child, but you are still a child and you do not really understand how things are. Impetuous child. It is a very gentle answer. Impetuous child. That tree, young and strong. So if you look there, you will see a tree. So now we have a completely different image. Until now, we had the image of the black blood and also the back that is covered with red scars. But now Africa is providing a completely different image and saying, look at that tree. So this image that is given in answer, in response, in contrast by Africa is that of a tree. And what kind of a tree? Young and strong. That tree, young and strong, that tree over there, splendidly alone amidst white and faded flowers. So this is a very interesting phrase. There is a tree, it is young, it is strong, and it is coming up. We know that this tree is going to grow up to become a very powerful tree. But right now, it is young. It is young and strong, and that tree is alone. But it is not lonely, it is splendidly alone. All around it are white and faded flowers. It is as if on the ground there are all these white and faded flowers that have already fallen from some tree. And they now those flowers are just going to fade away, they are going to just deteriorate. So all around the tree are white and faded flowers. They are lying on the ground. They are dead. They are lifeless. And the tree, the young and strong tree, which is splendidly alone, is full of life. The future is in that tree. Now, this white and faded flowers, obviously, that is an image that refers to Europe. So the time of Europe is past. The whites, the time of the colonizer is past. Their glory is fading, just like the white and faded flowers lying on the ground in the forest. And instead, it is now the time of Africa. So don't think about Africa as an ancient country. It is true, it is an ancient country with all these ancestral savannas and all that. And don't think about Africa as this country bearing only the pain and humiliation and this very dark history of slavery. But this is how you should now look at Africa. It is a very young country. It is right now when the European countries are losing their power, countries like the African countries are now coming into their own. They are very young and they are strong. They are so strong that they can actually someday become greater than the European countries. So that tree, young and strong, that tree over there, splendidly alone amidst white and faded flowers, that is your Africa springing up anew, springing up patiently, obstinately. So that is your Africa. That tree is the right image of Africa that you should bear in your mind. And remember, this grave voice of Africa had called him an impetuous child. So you are also like that tree. Actually, you are such a young person, but you are impetuous, you are spirited, you are strong. Africa is just like you, and it is just like that tree that you see there. Both you and Africa are like a young and strong tree that is now growing up. So that tree over there, that is your Africa springing up anew. So Africa had her time long, long ago before colonialism, and then colonialism kind of suppressed her. Africa was completely depressed under the dread of colonialism, and now it is springing up anew, just like the grass in the savannas. It is springing up anew. It is springing up again. Springing up patiently, obstinately. So the time of Europe will go. We know that. We are still young. Right now, it is not our time, but someday it will be our time. Tomorrow belongs to Africa. Today, the past may have belonged to Europe. Today also may belong to Europe, but we can see that Europe's time is over. They are white and faded flowers. Their time will soon go, and our time will come. We will be patient. We will wait patiently until it is our time, and we will work very slowly, obstinately. We will not let go of our pride. We will not let go of our hope. We will wait. And see, this idea of obstinately is connected to the verb springing up. So think about certain kind of plants or trees that no matter how much you try to repress it, it will still spring up. So that is a certain kind of obstinacy, a certain kind of stubbornness that you can see in certain trees or certain plants. So Africa is like that. No matter what happens, we will survive, we will prevail. That is your Africa springing up anew, springing up patiently, obstinately, whose fruit bit by bit acquires the bitter taste of liberty. So someday this tree will bear fruit. This young and strong tree will someday grow up enough to bear fruit, and it will not be an easy path. It is, we have to be very patient, we have to be very obstinate, it will take a long time, it will take a lot of hard work. Only then can we actually come into our own, only then can we become powerful, much more powerful than the Europeans. Only then can we become free and independent, and not just in terms of political independence, but also in terms of everything. We should become the Africa can actually become the stars of the world. But for that, it is not an easy process. We have to be very patient, we have to work hard, and the liberty that we are soon going to attain. So I already mentioned that David Diop is from Senegal, and Senegal gained independence from France in 1960, which was around the time that Diop died. So for the most of his life, he actually lived as a colonial subject. So he's saying that liberty, it is both political independence and a much deeper spiritual, cultural kind of independence that Africa is going to gain from the Western countries, from the colonial powers. That liberty is like a fruit that someday will grow on this tree. And you know that fruits don't suddenly just grow. Suddenly one day fruit comes and then it will become very sweet. That is not how things go. Rather, fruit will start as very small, and then it will grow, and then initially it will not be ripe, it will be bitter if you taste it, and it will take a certain process, it will take a certain time for the fruit to actually become sweet. So like that, the liberty that we will acquire, just like a fruit growing in that young and strong tree, the liberty we acquire will also come only bit by bit, slowly, and initially the taste of liberty will be bitter. This is a very interesting phrase, because normally we say the sweet taste of liberty. We think that liberty is something so sweet. We all want liberty, we want independence, we want freedom, and we think that liberty will taste sweet. But with liberty will come a set of responsibilities. Liberty is not something that will come very easily. With liberty will come the knowledge that we have lost so much for it. So even if you think about an independence struggle, if you think about India's independence struggle, for example, we know that so much was lost. So many lives were lost. So many problems were faced by people in the acquisition of liberty. So similarly, liberty is not something that comes easily. Liberty will always have a bitter taste, because just like that fruit, which is just beginning to ripen, there will be a slight bitterness in the taste of liberty, and only bit by bit will that taste actually come into its own, just like a nation. So the last line seems to tell us that just getting liberty is not enough. The entire process of the growing up of the tree, of the flowering and fruition of the tree, is a very long process. We have to be extremely patient, we have to work really hard for that. Even if we work very hard, the fruit of liberty that we gain may actually end up tasting very bitter, because we will have to sacrifice a lot for that liberty. We will have to deal with a lot of issues and problems and responsibilities. So liberty is not something very easy, but rather something that is difficult, something that is bitter, but something for which we will still strive. So that is the poem Africa by David Diop. So I hope that is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything you want to discuss? Any questions or anything you want to talk about this poem? Or if you want to, type your questions in the chat box, that's also okay. I'm going to stop recording now. Is that okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.